Every year around the world, workers in various organizations experience burnout to the extent that they look to change not only where they work, but also how they work. We'll talk with a survivor of corporate burnout who's become a therapist, coach, and consultant. Up next on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each episode, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk Psych Health and Safety.
Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. Burnout is a state of emotional, physical, or mental exhaustion. It's caused by excessive or prolonged stress. It can occur when you're feeling overwhelmed. Burnout can be caused by work-related stress, taking on more than one could handle at work or school or interpersonally with friends and family, poor self-care, feeling underappreciated, unrecognized, unfairly treated, feeling insecure in your position, being unsure of the requirements of your job, the requirements of a relationship, or poor leadership in general. Signs of burnout include feeling exhausted, sluggish, feeling overwhelmed, unable to complete simple tasks, getting angry, frustrated quickly, headaches, stomach aches, intestinal issues, fatigue, frequent illness, and changes in appetite or sleep. That's the focus of our conversation during this episode. And we're fortunate enough to have someone who has experienced burnout, has been able to understand it and come out on the other side with an interest in helping others address this challenge that we all face at some points in our life, or we tend to. So let's get right to it with an introduction of our guest by our guest, in this case with a question. Who is Jane Song?
Hi, Dr. Daniels. It's such a pleasure for me to be here. And thank you so much for having me here. I guess the question of who's Jane Song, it's so profound. You know, as I listen to your descriptions about what burnout is, in one sentence, I would say Jane Song is probably a recovery from burnout. And that journey really led me to become who I am today. So professionally, I work as a therapist and also a life coach and a consultant. So my passion is really to help people, not only from individual one-on-one basis that comes from therapy, coaching, but also consulting, where I can go in front of hundreds of people to tell them my story, not because I want to share for the sake of sharing, but tell people the story. Hey, burnout, it's real. It's far more than we can anticipate. It can hit us when we're least prepared, and we can do something about it. And that is who I am now. And that is my passion to really pass that message on. And I really appreciate you giving me the platform and the opportunity to share my passion. Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure to be able to do so. When this podcast started, year and a half or so ago, there was a part of me that wondered if there was anybody else out there who even cared about this. Because that often goes when, I certainly consider myself to be recovering from psychosocial hazard exposure myself. It's, we always are. It becomes a part of us, and our reactions and responses to it show up in all kinds of different ways. And again, burnout is one of them. these things going on in our environment that just cause us to respond in certain ways. And this is certainly a topic worth having a discussion about. So before we get into a little bit more detail about burnout specifically, though, another general question, and again, no textbook answer necessary,
Okay.
but what does psychological health and safety mean to you? When you hear those words, what do you think what does that mean to you?
Psychological health and safety to me is when, especially in the work space, right? Earlier you mentioned about the different definitions of burnout. I think it's really for a person to feel safe enough that they can perform their jobs to the best of their capabilities, whether it's emotionally, physically, spiritually. If we are if we don't feel safe physically, we can't perform, right? But a lot of people undermine the fact that many people don't feel emotionally safe. I mean, I can give you examples and examples of my past fashion industry experience, right? If you have watched The Devil Wears Prada,
Yes.
that poor girl, I mean, she didn't feel safe emotionally. Even when she was home, 11 o'clock, 12 p.m., 12 a.m., she didn't feel safe emotionally because you never know if someone's going to call you and invade your personal privacy space, right? That,
Right.
to me, it's all these elements making a person to perform at their ultimate um, possibilities or capabilities.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. So you've started to introduce it just a little bit. So let's dive a little bit into, since this is, I generally have these conversations around work, I honestly, I sometimes people might wonder why I do that, um, but because a lot of what we learn about safety starts at work. It's also where we learn a little bit about trauma as well. Now, trauma can come from home, but often when it's at home, we don't even recognize what it is because we don't have another frame of reference. So until we get out with other people, we don't really, even good or bad, it's hard to make the comparison. So let's chat a little bit about, your work history. So what did you start off wanting to be a life coach and mental health counselor, or did you start doing some other stuff?
Right. Great question.
Yeah.
I think your question is so deep. When I examine myself coming out of burnout, I really spend a lot of time examining myself and ask myself the question, what pushed Jane to the point of burnout? Right. So, and that question is different for every person. Me personally, because of a gut burnout, I came out of it. That determined me to go into the seminary. Actually, if you watch
Hmm.
the movie Eat, Pray, Love, right? I kind of had one of those moments where I had an epiphany in my life. I had this very successful job, getting paid a lot of money to travel the world in the fashion industry. You can imagine the fashion capitals: London, Milan, Paris, New York. Great. Superficially, everyone looked at me and they were like, wow, you have the best job. You look amazing. You get really good brands for like 20% the price. So on the surface, life looked so fantastic. And I had believed a lie. If I keep up the image, if I looked good, I'm going to feel good inside.
Mm.
Guess what? It didn't happen. Right. So what was happening was, I'm just answering your questions long
Yeah.
winded because, it really helps me to understand why I became what I do now, right? My professionally. So in the fashion industry, I was traveling extensively, a lot of red eye flights and dinners with customers, and sometimes after a long day of work and entertainment, because of time differences, if I were in London, my headquarters in Hong Kong, we had to jump on the call, right? So just like
Mm.
insane hours, or we were calling the US, and in the beginning it was fun. You have so much adrenaline because it's so exciting. Every new place, every new event, it's like, wow, super cool, super nice people. I can't believe I'm meeting these people who are supposed to be on the magazines, right? And you meet them, you're like adrenaline, rush, excitement. But as we all know, that adrenaline can only fuel us to a certain extent. At one point, adrenaline crushes, the body start to really break down because our body can only handle exhaustion for so long, right? Like you very well mentioned earlier, the consequences are brain fog, complete fatigue, loss of concentration, lack of creativity. I sit in front of my computer, nothing's coming out, and that's not
Wow.
good for a fashion person.
Right.
You're
Right.
in the field of creativity, you're dealing with designers, you have to be creative, and I had none of that. I couldn't, to the point I couldn't even think straight because
Mm.
the brain is so fogged. I didn't have enough oxygen, right? So it forced me to sit down and think about, what am I doing? And I tell you, when a person hit the wall from burnout, they're going to start to experience a lot of cynicism, not only for work, but also for their lives. Am I really meant for this? Am I good enough to even do my job? Who am I? So I fell into a deep existential crisis. Now I tell you, Dr. Daniels, I'm a woman of faith. I believed
Mm.
in God. I always thought God gave me that job. I was able to do a lot of amazing things around the world, but I started to question, where is God? There's a really famous book called Where's God When It Hurts by Philip Yancey, right?
Mm.
I was like drinking that book. I'm like, where are you? Why am I going through all these? Everything forced me to completely stop my life. And that's when I quit, cold turkey quit my job and stepped back, came back to the US after 10, 15 years traveling the world, living in different countries. I came back to the US, came back to my family. I would say started my recovering process.
Mm.
Right? It was during that journey, God showed me, okay, you have a bigger calling in life. What you've gone through, I'm not going to waste a second of that. I'm going to use that to make you a better vessel to help others. And that's how I got into mental health. I went back to school, got my master's degrees in mental health counseling, and then
Mm.
got into coaching because I know we can't just keep going back to the why things happen. That's primarily what I address as a mental health counselor. But in coaching, we talk about, okay, now how do we move forward?
Right. 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 Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot to unpack. How and it's something that you brought up. I really found interesting that how you said that I look good on the outside, but I didn't feel good on the inside. I think that's really really important. I heard a I heard these little quips, and I tend to repeat some of them. But I heard someone say once that sometimes people spend a lot of time buying things that they don't need, going places that they don't really like to be with people they don't want to be around, and it's a really interesting kind of circle they put themselves in. But underneath it all, you don't really want to do it. You're just doing it for this kind of superficial, how it looks on the outside type of reason, and it's not satisfying. It just really isn't satisfying at all. And to your point, your body will tell you at a certain point that this isn't working.
Right.
It isn't. There are a lot of people who, again, on the outside really look clean and sharp, and they've got all the trappings of success, but underneath it all, they're absolutely miserable. Underneath, so you also mentioned that you have some experience in seminary. I think you said, or
Yes.
so.
Yes.
So how does all that start to line up? Because that's quite an experience in and of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you were talking about how superficially I look good, right? Like in the fashion industry, we have a saying like the worse you feel, the higher the heels.
Okay.
Right? Like I'm gonna put the highest heels on because I feel crap inside.
Really?
And that is something, Dr. Daniels, I think it's really important for your listeners to really think about what is driving them to burn out. Now, you and I can talk about self-care, stress management. We can talk hours on that. But in my research and my work with my clients and myself, I realized there's a deeper drive that's driving us to burnout. For me
Mm,
personally, I was trying to prove to the world that I deserve to exist, that I
mm,
was worthy. Okay. And that is a vicious cycle because I can look so perfect. I can make a lot of money. I can be living on the top of the Hong Kong island, have the beautiful, amazing apartment, great lifestyle per se. But deep down, like you said, I was hollow. I was empty. Even though I didn't go to drink or, alcohol
right,
addiction, whatever drugs, but
right.
my idol was work.
Mm,
I used my job to fill the void that I had to show people I was good enough.
mm,
And I want to
mm.
say that it just not going to work, right? Some
Right.
people use family, some people use money, sex, addiction, whatever that may be. It's never going to fill the void in our own hearts, right? Where is that coming from? Where is that our acceptance coming from? I didn't really understand that until God took me into the seminary for 4 years. Well,
Wow.
my face was on the ground. I had no makeup, no heels, no lipsticks, just
Mhm.
me
Right.
with a lot of books, a lot of solitude, and God, I start to unpack my soul, right?
Mm,
To face the
mm.
reality. Who is Jane Song? That's why when you ask me the question, it's a loaded question. Who is she? Who is she
Right.
living her life for? What
Right.
is her purpose? There's a great article written by a nurse. I can't remember her name off my head, but she actually interviewed maybe hundreds of her clients who were on their deathbed. And she started to interview them, and she started to ask the question, what are your top regrets in your life? And the number one thing, to my shock, people came back to her over. This is people are dying. They don't care. They're dying. Life's over. They would tell her, my biggest regret is I've lived my life for someone else
Wow.
to prove a point.
Wow.
And that's exactly what I was doing, Dr. Daniels, in my
Mm,
20 years in my career. I was trying to prove to the Chinese society where I came from that as a woman, as a younger daughter of the family, that I was worthy. You see, that was my
mm,
problem. I was
mm.
proving, I don't even know if they cared. Nobody cared, like I
Right.
was proving to my dad or my parents. I don't know if they cared so much. So, but in my head, I had to prove to them I was so successful, so happy, everything was great to the point of hitting the wall and hitting burnout. So seminary journey really made me realize, okay, I can't just dance on the surface. I can work out, I can eat well, self-care, great. I'm not saying it doesn't work. That's how I
Right.
got out
Right.
of burnout. But
Right.
when we try to run away from the deep cause that's
Yes.
driving us to hit the wall,
Yes.
it's not going to work.
Yes. Yeah. That's so absolutely true. There's a lot of focus on addressing problems after they occur, as opposed to getting to the real heart of what the issue. I mean, I spent a lot of years, and so my listeners know, in the fire rescue service, and there are in the United States we spend $300+ billion on fire departments and fire sprinklers and fire extinguishers and training and all this stuff, but not near enough time on how we prevent the fire from starting in the first place. The same thing occurs with mental health, with physical health. But in the mental health space, we've got apps and we've got resiliency training and we've got, uh, yoga and fruit bowls and
Mhm.
exercise and all this stuff. Which again, I not to suggest that there isn't value to it, but why not get to the root of why we're there in the first place? What is it going on in the environment that we're in and in our own head? And so a lot of this recovery actually starts, again, that's another reason why I asked that question, is if you don't know you, you will put yourself in situations that aren't good for you because you don't know you. And so you wander into something and go, this might be fun and it looks good and everybody else is doing it, but it's really not you. It doesn't work for you. And that starts to come up at some point. It starts to, because the gears don't really mesh. And again, not everyone believes in a higher power, a deity, a God, or whatever, but we were all designed to be something. And until we find out what that purpose is, it's not really going to work. It's not really going to work. Wow.
That's right. I completely agree with you, Dr. Daniels. I wanted to add that the key reason, in my perspective now, looking back, why people don't want to seek healing is because healing hurts, right? Like I work with a lot of clients, especially in the therapy realm, who has had trauma. You mentioned trauma before. And trauma can be, the way I define trauma, it's basically anything that happened to a person in their past that changed the way they think about life.
Right.
So people often think trauma is like, sexual trauma, violence, car accident, losing family member, right? Big major stuff. Yeah, those are trauma too, but it can also be smaller things that really negatively impacted how we view the world. And from that moment on, we see the world in the negative lens. And that's going to really change our performance, change our trajectory, the way we see life, right? So I think a lot of that, why don't people seek healing? It's because it hurts. Nobody wants to go back to trauma. Past hurts, especially unguided. Right. So when we think about our pain, past rejection, anything negative that happened to us, we don't want to think about it. We put on a comedy show. We get ourselves really busy. We work ourselves to death. We'd rather do anything than sitting down with our own selves and try to think about it. Right. I've done plenty of that in my 20s and early 30s. I try to run away. Right. From sitting down and really think about, Jane, why do you do the things you do? Because going back hurts. And that's why I'm a huge advocate for mental health counseling, right?
Yes.
I always tell my clients, the fact that you're here, you are so brave. You took the time and courage to go for healing, because healing, it's the beginning of, willing to heal is the beginning of the journey of healing itself.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I look at mental health care now just like dental care. I don't go to the dentist because I have a toothache. I really don't. I mean, I go regularly, go on my checkups, a whole deal. I'm not sure if I have the prettiest teeth in the world. It doesn't really matter. But I believe that if I pay attention to it, then I will mitigate or prevent some things from getting worse. So I won't have to put my teeth in a jar sooner.
Right.
But I think that mental health is really the same way. In my early experiences, I would go after something happened. And most recently, most recent relationship with a therapist, it's kind of like going for a tune-up and have a conversation about, I think things are going fine. I don't, there's no major, but I don't want to get to the space that I was in, when I wasn't, when I was really feeling kind of down and, somewhat depressed and all that type of, why wait to get there if you're able to extricate yourself from it? And another point that you made that is really so important is I heard this once, that it's not the stories that other people tell about you that are most impactful. It's the ones that you tell yourself that
Exactly.
really impact you. Because the folks outside, they're having conversations about all kind of different things. But again, back to the question, who are you? It's if I don't really know myself, then I tell myself stories about myself that aren't really helpful for me. It isn't. It's a kind of reality, but it's not a helpful reality. And everything has more than one side. Everything does. I
Absolutely.
mean,
Yeah.
and we find ourselves kind of stuck focusing on, so we get our brain looks at things and it just says either a threat or reward. That's just how the brain works. But the threats and the negative things, they form these patterns that we kind of get stuck on. And again, to your point, it's difficult to extricate myself from that if I get in too deep. It really is.
Right.
So I
Right.
need someone, we need people to help us. And so you get burned out at work, you do seminary, you end up as a therapist. So what's the difference in your mind between therapy and coaching? Are they kind of the same thing?
Right. Great question. Therapy is a lot about what we talk about, right? I love how you mentioned we what story we tell ourselves. It's vital, right? In therapy, we actually a lot of the work is to find out why do we do the things we do, and what make us think or behave the way we do today or in the past. We look into the past, try to analyze the pattern, try to fix what's broken. And from there, we move